Okay, let's go to the debt ceiling deal between the government and the Greens to scrap the ceiling. Treasurer Joe Hockey has told Sky News this morning that Labor is no longer relevant to any debate about economic management. Let's have a listen.
They're crying crocodile tears because the Greens are proving to be more sensible and the Labor Party is now consigned to the back of the garden. I mean, the Labor Party is stuck in the basement on economic policy and it's all of their own making. They have made themselves irrelevant.
Consigned to the back of the garden, made yourselves irrelevant. Basically, according to the Treasurer, it's Labor, not the Greens, who are now the economic fringe dwellers.
Well, a pretty desperate attempt to hide his own hypocrisy, rushing to a deal with the Greens to avoid scrutiny on debt. I mean, this is a government which said they'd pay back the debt. Is there a clearer example, Fran, of this Liberal Party saying one thing before the election and doing exactly the opposite after the election? We're seeing it right across the board and we're seeing it in economic management. Now, if the government thinks they're going to walk around the country saying we'll pay off the debt and then they get into office, the Parliament's just going to say, oh, that's okay, you can abolish the debt limit, no problem. Well, the Labor Party's not going to go along with that. They made promises to the Australian people which they are abjectly failing to keep, and we are entitled and in fact obliged to hold them to account for that, and we will.
But I'm just wondering what promise it is you want them to keep, because you were arguing when you were in government, when you were Treasurer, in fact, before the election, that some increase in debt was necessary in the current global environment. And now you're saying the Coalition should honour its suggestion that debt shouldn't rise.
Well, they're not mutually exclusive, Fran. To say in office that the debt was manageable and was indeed necessary for good economic management is not to say that with this new government in office, they shouldn't be held to account for the commitments. I mean, there'd be Liberal voters across the country waking up this morning in absolute incredulity that a party they voted for, with all the talk of tawdry deals with the Greens and the need to pay off the debt, has done a deal with the Greens in a desperate attempt to avoid scrutiny. Now, Joe Hockey's about to bring down his mini-budget. It will show the impact of his decisions and what has happened on his watch since the Labor Party handed over office. Now, he is trying to avoid that scrutiny by abolishing the debt ceiling and not being answerable to the Parliament for the debt that he will be managing.
That's not true, though, is it, in terms of answerable to the Parliament? The whole argument that Labor had for bringing in a debt ceiling in 2008 was about transparency and accountability. Under this deal with the Greens, the Coalition Government has agreed to report to the Parliament every time debt increases by more than $50 billion, and it must reveal if the increase is due to lower revenue or higher than expected spending. Isn't that a good result in terms of transparency?
Well, the ultimate transparency and accountability is needing to go to Parliament for approval. You can have all the reporting mechanisms you like, but if you've got to go to the Parliament for approval, as we've shown over recent weeks, and where the Parliament can hold the government to account and say, well, you'll need to justify this, and the government's been at 6s and 7s and not being able to justify it and refusing to release their mini-budget until next week, it appears. Now, Mr Hockey's got a problem on his hands. We have the Charter of Budget Honesty, which means that the true and clear state of the books when we handed over office is there for all to see under the system introduced by Peter Costello. The pre-election economic forecast, not my figures, not Penny Wong's figures, not the Labor Party's figures, but the figures of the Treasury and the Department of Finance show the deficit that he inherited and the debt that he inherited. And if it's gotten worse from then, due to decisions he's taken, like the transfer to the Reserve Bank, like the tax break for people with more than $2 million in the superannuation account, like the changes to the tax integrity system, which he's introduced, then we're going to hold him to account for it.